The rain drummed against the kitchen window of our suburban Denver home as I kneaded the dough for tomorrow's sourdough loaves. It was 11:47 p.m., and the familiar ache in my lower back reminded me I'd been on my feet for nearly 16 hours straight. The scent of cinnamon rolls cooling on the rack mixed with the yeasty aroma of rising bread, creating the comforting atmosphere that had become my sanctuary over the past 3 years. "Sarah, are you seriously still playing with your little baking project?" David's voice cut through my concentration like a blade. He stood in the doorway, loosening his tie after another late night at the accounting firm. His tone carried that familiar edge of condescension that had become increasingly common lately. I didn't look up from the dough, my hands working the gluten with practiced precision. "It's not playing, David. I have 47 orders for this weekend's farmer's market, plus the standing contract with Morrison's Cafe." He walked to the refrigerator, pulling out a beer with more force than necessary. The bottle cap hit the granite countertop with a sharp ping. "Come on, Sarah. Let's be realistic here. You're making what? Maybe $300 a weekend? That barely covers the ingredients and gas money." My jaw tightened, but I kept my voice level. "It's growing every month. Mrs. Patterson from the school board wants to discuss catering their events. And the Hendersons are considering me for their daughter's wedding." "Sarah," he interrupted, taking a long swig of beer. "Listen to yourself. This whole bakery thing is just a hobby that's gotten out of hand. You're exhausting yourself for pocket change while I'm out there actually supporting this household." The dough in my hands suddenly felt heavier. I'd heard variations of his speech before, but tonight it hit differently. Maybe it was the exhaustion, or maybe it was the way he said hobby like it was a dirty word. "A hobby." I finally looked at him, my flour-dusted hands stilling. "David, I've built something from nothing. Do you know how many people drove across town last week just for my chocolate croissants?" He set his beer down harder than necessary, the sound echoing in our modern kitchen with its pristine white cabinets and marble surfaces, all paid for by his real job, as he liked to remind me. "And how many of those people are actually paying enough to make it worthwhile? You're running yourself ragged for what amounts to a glorified bake sale." He gestured at the cooling racks, mixing bowls, and flour containers that covered every available surface. "Look at this mess. You've turned our kitchen into some kind of industrial operation." I felt heat rising in my chest, not the comfortable warmth from the ovens, but something sharper, more dangerous. This mess represents 3 years of building relationships, perfecting recipes, and creating something I'm passionate about. Passion doesn't pay the mortgage, Sarah. His voice took on that patronizing tone he used when explaining tax codes to confuse clients. "I make $78,000 a year. That's what keeps this roof over our heads, not your cute little cupcakes." The kitchen fell silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of rain against the windows. I stared at him, this man I'd married 6 years ago, wondering when his support had transformed into tolerance, and tolerance into outright dismissal. "You used to love my baking," I said quietly, remembering our early dating days when he bragged to friends about my homemade bread and special occasion cakes. "I still do, honey." His tone softened slightly, but the damage was already done. "I'm just saying maybe it's time to be realistic about what this is. It's a nice hobby, but it's not a business. Not a real one, anyway." I turned back to my dough, but my hands were shaking now. 3 years ago, when I'd started selling my grandmother's cinnamon roll recipe at the local farmer's market, David had been supportive, even proud. He'd helped me set up my first table, carried my cash box, bragged to his coworkers about his wife's amazing baking skills. But as my customer base grew and my weekends became consumed with baking, his attitude shifted. What started as gentle suggestions to take it easy evolved into pointed comments about time management and financial priorities. Now, apparently we'd reached the point where my work, and it was work, regardless of what he called it, was nothing more than an expensive hobby. The kitchen timer chimed, breaking the tense silence. I moved mechanically to check the bread in the oven, golden brown and perfectly risen. As I pulled out the loaves, I caught my reflection in the oven door's glass, flour in my hair, exhaustion etched around my eyes, but also something else. A determination that had been building for months. "I'm going to bed," David announced, already heading toward the stairs. "Try not to stay up all night with your baking." After his footsteps faded and I heard our bedroom door close, I stood alone in my kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of what he called just a hobby. The artisan breads cooling on their racks, the perfectly piped cupcakes waiting for tomorrow's pickup, the detailed order sheets and customer contact information organized in my grandmother's recipe box. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the messages that had accumulated throughout the day. Orders, compliments, requests for custom work. Mrs. Chin wanted 36 of my signature lemon bars for her book club. The Garcias needed a birthday cake for their son's graduation party. Tom from the hardware store was asking if I could make his wife's favorite apple turnovers for their anniversary. These weren't just customers. They were people who valued what I created, who drove across town and waited in line, and came back week after week. They saw worth in what I did, even if my own husband couldn't. I sat at the kitchen island, surrounded by the tools of my trade, and opened my laptop. The blue glow illuminated the flour-dusted surface as I stared at the blank browser window. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment before I typed. Small Business Loans, Colorado. If David wanted to talk about realistic expectations and real businesses, maybe it was time to show him exactly what those looked like. The Colorado Springs Small Business Development Center occupied a modest building downtown, its brick facade weathered by mountain winds and high-altitude sun. I sat in the parking lot for 10 minutes before my appointment, gripping the steering wheel of my Honda Civic and watching successful-looking people walk in and out of the building with confident strides. "You can do this, Sarah," I whispered to myself, checking my reflection in the rearview mirror. I dressed carefully in my best blazer, navy blue, professional but approachable, and carried a leather portfolio that had been a college graduation gift from my parents. Inside the building, motivational posters lined the walls alongside photos of local business owners who'd made it. A coffee shop owner smiling behind an espresso machine. A woman in work clothes standing proudly in front of her auto repair shop. An elderly man surrounded by handcrafted furniture in what was clearly his workshop. "Sarah Mitchell." A warm voice called my name. I turned to see a woman in her 50s approaching, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and her smile genuinely welcoming. "I'm Linda Rodriguez, your business counselor. Ready to talk about making your dreams a reality." Linda's office felt like a comfortable library, with bookshelves full of business guides and a large window overlooking the mountains. She gestured for me to sit across from her desk, which was organized but not intimidating, a good sign. "So, tell me about your bakery," she said, settling into her chair with a notepad ready. For the next hour, I found myself talking more openly about my business than I had in months. Linda asked pointed questions about my customer base, profit margins, production capacity, and growth potential. She wanted to see my financial records, my recipe costs, my customer feedback. "These numbers are impressive, Sarah," she said, reviewing my spreadsheets. "You're showing consistent month-over-month growth. Your profit margin on specialty items is healthy, and your customer retention rate is excellent. Tell me, what does your husband think about your expansion plans?" I hesitated, the memory of our kitchen argument still fresh. He thinks it's more of a hobby than a real business." Linda's eyebrows rose slightly. "A hobby that generated $18,000 last year? That's either a very expensive hobby or a very profitable small business." She leaned forward. "Sarah, I've seen a lot of entrepreneurs come through this office. Some have great ideas but no follow-through. Others have passion but no business sense. You have both, plus something equally important. You have proof of concept. Your customers are already telling you they want more of what you're offering." She pulled out a thick folder and set it on the desk between us. "Let's talk about what real expansion would look like. Have you considered the commercial licensing requirements for a bakery?" Over the next 2 hours, Linda walked me through the process of transitioning from a home-based operation to a legitimate commercial bakery. Health department permits, commercial kitchen space, liability insurance, business licenses, employee regulations, tax implications. It was overwhelming but also exhilarating. "The good news," Linda explained, "is that Colorado has some of the most entrepreneur-friendly small business laws in the country. The cottage food laws that let you bake from home are just the beginning. There are several commercial kitchen spaces available for rent, and the SBA has excellent loan programs for food service businesses." She handed me a business card. "I want you to meet Tom Bradley. He runs Rocky Mountain Commercial Kitchens about 15 minutes from your house. He specializes in helping small food businesses scale up production. As I drove home, my mind raced with possibilities. A commercial kitchen would mean professional-grade ovens, larger production capacity, the ability to sell wholesale to restaurants and cafes. It would also mean significant overhead, employees, health inspections, and a level of commitment that would transform my hobby into an undeniable business. That evening, while David worked late at the office, I sat at our kitchen table surrounded by pamphlets, loan applications, and business plan templates. My laptop screen showed the website for Rocky Mountain Commercial Kitchens, a clean, modern facility with professional equipment and reasonable rental rates. I was deep in calculations when David's key turned in the front door. He found me in the kitchen, papers spread across the granite countertop like I was planning a military campaign. "What's all this?" he asked, loosening his tie and peering over my shoulder at the loan application on my screen. "Research," I said simply, not looking up from the cash flow projections I was working on. He picked up one of the SBA pamphlets, frowning as he read. "Sarah, you're not seriously considering taking out a loan for this baking thing, are you?" "This baking thing has a name, David. It's called Mitchell's Artisan Bakery, and yes, I'm exploring my options." He sat down heavily in the chair across from me. "Honey, we need to be realistic here. Small businesses fail at an incredible rate, especially restaurants and food service. You'd be risking our financial security for what?" I interrupted, finally meeting his eyes. "For something I've already proven works. For a customer base that's been growing consistently for 3 years. He gestured at the papers spread between us. "For a pipe dream. Sarah, you make good money as a part-time graphic designer, and my career is on track for promotion to senior partner. Why would we jeopardize that stability for something so uncertain?" I stared at him, realizing that somewhere along the way, we'd stopped being a team. His language had shifted from we to I, from supporting my dreams to protecting our financial security, which in his mind apparently meant his income and his career trajectory. "What if it's not uncertain?" I asked quietly. "What if I could show you that this isn't just a pipe dream?" He leaned back in his chair, his expression a mixture of concern and condescension. "Sarah, I love your optimism, but love and passion don't guarantee business success. You need market research, competitive analysis, scalability studies." "You mean like this?" I pulled out Linda's folder, thick with market research on the Colorado bakery industry, demographic studies of our area, and competitive analysis of similar businesses in the Denver metro area. David's expression shifted as he flipped through the professional documents. "Where did you get all this?" "The Small Business Development Center. I met with a counselor today. Her name is Linda Rodriguez, and she thinks I have excellent potential for expansion." "You went to the SBDC without talking to me?" His voice rose slightly. "Sarah, this affects both of us. Any debt you take on, any risk you assume, any success I achieve," I added, my own voice growing stronger. "David, you keep talking about risk like I'm gambling our life savings on a lottery ticket. This is a business plan based on 3 years of proven performance." He was quiet for several minutes, reading through Linda's materials with the focused attention he usually reserved for tax documents. Finally, he looked up at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Okay," he said slowly. "Let's say, hypothetically, that this could work. What would you need from me?" It was the first time in months that he'd asked what I needed rather than telling me what I should do. I felt a small spark of hope. "I need you to believe in me," I said simply. "I need you to see that this isn't just a hobby that got out of hand. It's something I'm good at, something people value, something that could become our future." He nodded slowly, though I could see the wheels turning behind his eyes. I'll think about it. But Sarah, if we're going to do this, we need to do it right. Business plans, insurance, legal structure, all of it." "I know," I said, gathering the papers into neat stacks. "That's exactly what I intend to do." As I organized the materials, I felt something I hadn't experienced in our marriage for a long time: respect. Not agreement, not enthusiasm, but a grudging acknowledgement that I might know what I was talking about. It was a start. 3 weeks later, I stood in the gleaming commercial kitchen at Rocky Mountain Commercial Kitchens, watching steam rise from my first batch of croissants, made in a professional convection oven. The facility was everything Linda had promised: spotless stainless steel surfaces, industrial mixers, and enough oven capacity to handle 10 times my current production volume. Tom Bradley, the facility manager, stood beside me as I pulled out the perfect golden pastries. He was a bear of a man with flour permanently embedded under his fingernails and the kind of calm confidence that came from 30 years in the food industry. "Beautiful lamination," he said, examining one of my chocolate croissants. "You can see the layers clearly, and the chocolate distribution is perfect. How long did it take you to master this technique?" "About 6 months of disasters," I admitted, arranging the croissants on cooling racks. My kitchen floor looked like a crime scene more times than I care to remember. Tom laughed, a deep rumble that echoed in the high-ceiling space. "That's how you know someone's serious about their craft. The ones who give up after a few failures were never going to make it anyway." Over the past 3 weeks, I'd been renting kitchen time 3 mornings a week, testing my recipes at scale, and getting comfortable with professional equipment. The learning curve was steep, but the results were undeniable. My production capacity had tripled, my consistency improved, and I was able to take on larger orders without turning my home kitchen into a disaster zone. "I've got some news you might find interesting," Tom said, checking his tablet. "Morrison's Cafe called this morning. They want to discuss an exclusive supply contract for all their baked goods. Apparently, your lemon bars have become their bestseller." My heart jumped. Morrison's was a popular breakfast spot with 3 locations across Denver. An exclusive contract would mean guaranteed volume, predictable income, and the kind of legitimacy that would be hard for anyone to dismiss as just a hobby. "What kind of volume are we talking about?" I asked, trying to keep my voice professional despite the excitement building in my chest. "Probably 400 to 500 units per week across all locations. Muffins, croissants, Danish, some specialty items. It would require you to move from part-time rental to a full commercial lease, but the numbers would definitely support it." I spent the rest of the morning calculating production requirements, ingredient costs, and labor needs. By the time I packed up my equipment, I had the framework for a business proposal that would transform my small operation into a legitimate bakery supplier. That evening, David and I sat in our living room, neutral territory away from the kitchen where most of our arguments had taken place. I'd prepared a presentation on my laptop, complete with financial projections, market analysis, and growth timelines. "Morrison's Cafe wants an exclusive supply contract," I began without preamble. David looked up from his phone, suddenly alert. "Morrison's? The place downtown where we had brunch last month. That one, plus their 2 other locations. They're talking about 400 to 500 units per week." I walked him through the numbers, revenue projections, cost analysis, profit margins. Unlike our previous conversations, David asked detailed questions about cash flow, insurance requirements, and tax implications. His accounting background was actually helpful for once, identifying potential issues I hadn't considered. "The startup costs are significant," he said, reviewing my equipment list. "Commercial mixer, additional ovens, packaging supplies, increased ingredient inventory. You're looking at about $30,000 in capital requirements." "Which is exactly what the SBA loan would cover," I replied. "Linda's already pre-qualified me based on my current financials and the Morrison's contract." David was quiet for several minutes, his fingers drumming against his coffee cup in the pattern I recognized as deep thought. Finally, he looked at me with an expression that was equal parts impressed and concerned. "Sarah, this is actually real, isn't it? I mean, these numbers, this contract, this isn't a hobby anymore." "It never was just a hobby, David. It was always a business, just a small one. Now it has the potential to be something bigger." He nodded slowly. "If you sign this contract, there's no going back. You'll have legal obligations, delivery schedules, quality standards to maintain. It becomes your full-time job." "I know," I said simply. "That's exactly what I want." Over the next hour, we talked through the practicalities of the transition. I would need to quit my part-time graphic design work, which meant giving up the steady income that had been my safety net. We'd need to restructure our household budget to account for variable business income. And we'd be taking on debt for the first time since our mortgage. "There's something else," David said as we reached the end of my presentation. "If this works, If you really build this into a successful business, I owe you an apology. I was wrong to dismiss what you were doing. It was the closest thing to an admission of error I'd heard from him in years. Not quite the full acknowledgement I wanted, but progress nonetheless. I need you to believe in this, David. Not just tolerate it or manage the financial risk, but actually believe it can work. He was quiet for a long time, staring at the financial projections on my laptop screen. The numbers support it, he said finally. Your customer base is solid, your quality is consistent, and this Morrison's contract provides the foundation for real growth. From a business perspective, it makes sense. From a business perspective, it wasn't the emotional support I'd hoped for, but it was realistic endorsement from someone who understood financial risk better than anyone I knew. So we're doing this? I asked. David closed my laptop and looked at me directly. We're doing this. But Sarah, if we're going to do it, we're going to do it right. Professional business structure, proper insurance, legal contracts, accounting systems, all of it. I felt something shift between us. A tentative return to partnership after months of feeling like adversaries. We weren't quite on the same page yet, but at least we were reading from the same book. There's one more thing, I said, pulling out my phone. I need to call Linda tomorrow and schedule a meeting with Morrison's management. If we're going to sign this contract, I want to negotiate terms that set us up for long-term success. David's eyebrows rose. Us? You're good with numbers and contracts, David. I could use your help with the business side while I focus on production and quality. For the first time in months, he smiled at something related to my baking. You know what? I'd like that. I'd like that a lot. As we headed upstairs to bed, I felt something I hadn't experienced since this journey began. Genuine partnership. David wasn't just tolerating my dreams or managing the risks, he was becoming invested in the outcome. Tomorrow, I would call Linda and schedule the Morrisons' meeting. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of transforming my kitchen hobby into a commercial bakery. Tomorrow, I would take the first step toward showing everyone, including my husband, exactly what just a hobby could become. But tonight, for the first time in months, we were a team again. 6 months later, I stood behind the counter of Mitchell's Artisan Bakery, watching the morning rush unfold with the satisfaction of someone whose gamble had paid off spectacularly. The converted warehouse space in Denver's Highland neighborhood hummed with activity, 2 employees manning the ovens, another handling customer service, and the constant chime of the register marking another sale. The Morrisons' contract had been just the beginning. Word spread quickly through Denver's food scene about the new artisan bakery with the incredible croissants, and within weeks I was fielding calls from restaurants, cafes, and catering companies across the metro area. My little hobby had become a legitimate business with 12 employees, 7 commercial accounts, and a waiting list for custom wedding cakes. David had been instrumental in the expansion, handling contracts, insurance, and financial planning while I focused on production and recipe development. Our marriage had found a new equilibrium, built on mutual respect for each other's expertise rather than his dismissal of mine. But the real validation came on a Tuesday morning in March when my phone rang with an area code I didn't recognize. Sarah Mitchell? This is Rebecca Chen from Golden State Bakery Concepts in San Francisco. We're a franchise development company specializing in artisan bakery chains. We've been following your operation for several months, and we'd like to discuss a potential partnership. I nearly dropped the phone. Golden State Bakery Concepts was a major player in the specialty food franchise world, responsible for launching several successful bakery chains across the western United States. I'm sorry, I said, stepping away from the counter noise. Did you say franchise development? That's correct. We're looking to develop a new concept focused on artisan breads and European-style pastries, and your operation fits exactly what we're seeking. Would you be available for a preliminary discussion? 2 weeks later, Rebecca and her team flew to Denver. They spent a full day at the bakery, observing operations, tasting products, reviewing financial records, and interviewing key staff members. Rebecca was a sharp woman in her 40s with the kind of focused intensity that came from years of identifying successful concepts before they became obvious to everyone else. Your quality consistency is remarkable, she said, biting into one of my signature almond croissants. Most small bakeries can't maintain this standard across high-volume production. That's usually the barrier to scalability. Over lunch, she laid out their proposal. Golden State wanted to license my recipes, operational procedures, and branding for a franchise concept tentatively called Mitchell's Artisan. The financial terms were staggering: a six-figure licensing fee upfront, plus ongoing royalties from each franchise location. We're looking at an initial rollout of 15 locations across Colorado and Utah within the first year, Rebecca explained. If the concept proves successful, we'd expand throughout the Mountain West region. Conservatively, we're projecting 60 locations within 5 years. I tried to maintain professional composure while my mind reeled with the implications. A year ago, David had called my baking just a hobby. Now a major corporation wanted to build a franchise empire around my recipes. "I'll need to discuss this with my husband," I said, which was both practical and ironic. "He handles the business side of our operations." Rebecca smiled. "Of course. This is a significant decision. Take your time, review the terms with your attorney, and let us know if you have questions." That evening, David and I sat at our kitchen table, the same granite countertop where he dismissed my dreams as unrealistic fantasies. The franchise contract lay between us, thick with legal language and financial projections that represented more money than either of us had ever imagined. 60 locations, David said quietly, flipping through the development timeline. "Sarah, do you understand what this means?" "I think so," I replied, though the magnitude was still difficult to process. "It means that little hobby you thought was so unrealistic is about to become a multi-million-dollar franchise concept." David looked up at me, and for a moment I saw something I hadn't expected, genuine pride mixed with what might have been embarrassment. "I was wrong," he said simply. "I was completely, utterly wrong about what you were building. I looked at the small scale and saw limitation instead of potential. I focused on immediate profit margins instead of long-term value creation." He gestured at the contract. "This is what vision looks like, isn't it? The ability to see beyond current circumstances to what something could become." I reached across the table and took his hand. "David, I need you to understand something. This success isn't just mine. Your financial expertise, your help with contracts and business structure, I couldn't have grown this far without that support." "But I almost didn't give you that support," he said. "I almost talked you out of pursuing this because I couldn't see past my own limited perspective." We spent the next 2 hours going through the franchise agreement line by line. David's accounting background proved invaluable as he identified potential issues with territorial rights, quality control standards, and royalty calculations. By the time we finished reviewing the documents, we had a comprehensive list of questions and suggested modifications. "Are you going to sign it?" he asked as we organized the papers. I looked around our kitchen, the same space where I'd needed my first commercial bread orders, where David had dismissed my work as hobby-level baking, where we'd argued about realistic expectations and financial priorities. Now that same kitchen had produced the concept for a franchise empire. "I think so," I said, "but not the version they presented. I want territorial protection for our original bakery, quality control standards that maintain our reputation, and a development timeline that doesn't compromise the integrity of what we've built." David smiled, the first genuinely enthusiastic smile I'd seen from him regarding my business in months. "You know what? I think we should celebrate tonight. Dinner at Morrison's Cafe, where this whole expansion started." As we got ready to leave, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. The woman looking back at me was different from the one who'd stood in this same spot 6 months ago, exhausted and dismissed after another long day of hobby baking. This woman owned a successful business, employed a dozen people, and had just been offered a franchise deal that would make her concept available across multiple states. But more importantly, this woman had a partner who finally understood that sometimes the most realistic thing you can do is believe in what others call impossible. At Morrison's Cafe, we sat at the same corner table where we'd had brunch the morning after David first called my baking just a hobby. The irony wasn't lost on either of us as we ordered coffee and dessert, my lemon bars, which had become Morrison's signature item and led to the contract that launched everything. "I have something for you," David said, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a small wrapped box and set it on the table between us. Inside was a simple gold necklace with a charm in the shape of a whisk. "It's to commemorate your success," he said, "but also to apologize for not believing in you sooner. I should have seen what you were building instead of focusing on what I thought it wasn't." I fastened the necklace around my neck, the whisk settling against my collarbone like a reminder of how far I'd traveled from that frustrated night in our kitchen. "You know what the best part is?" I said, taking his hand across the table. "This is just the beginning. If the franchise succeeds, we'll be helping other people start their own businesses, create their own jobs, build their own dreams." David squeezed my hand. "Our own dreams, Sarah. We're partners in this now, in every sense of the word." As we walked back to the car, past the Morrison's Cafe sign that had become such an important part of our story, I thought about the journey from hobby baker to franchise owner. It hadn't been about proving David wrong, though that had certainly been satisfying. It had been about proving to myself that my instincts were worth trusting, that my work had value beyond anyone else's recognition, and that sometimes the most unrealistic thing you can do is accept other people's limitations as your own. The franchise contract was signed 3 weeks later. The first Mitchell's Artisan location outside of our original bakery opened in Boulder 6 months after that. By the end of the year, there were 8 locations across Colorado, with plans for Utah and Wyoming expansion already in development. But on that March evening, walking hand in hand with my husband past the cafe where our expansion had begun, the greatest success wasn't the financial projections or franchise opportunities. It was the simple fact that when I said I was building a business, he finally believed me. Sometimes that's all any of us really need, someone who believes in what we're building, even when they can't see the finished product yet. And sometimes, if we're persistent enough and good enough at what we do, we get the satisfaction of showing them the contract on a plate.